Amira's days were filled with quiet routines that seemed small to outsiders but carried the rhythm of a life lived with care and purpose. Each morning, she rose with the first light, brushing the dew from the village paths and tending to the small garden behind her modest home. Her hands, gentle yet precise, nurtured the seedlings as if she could coax the earth itself to grow faster, and the villagers often remarked that the flowers seemed to bloom brighter wherever Amira walked. Children followed her like a gentle current, laughing and playing, while the elders sought her counsel for matters both trivial and grave, trusting the wisdom that shone from her calm and measured voice. Her knowledge of herbs, weather patterns and village lore made her indispensable, and yet she carried all her talents lightly, never boasting, never claiming the praise she so quietly earned. But as the village's admiration grew, so too did Lasha's envy. The stepmother's eyes, once merely critical, now gleamed with something darker, a simmering resentment that grew in silence. Lasha had long been accustomed to being the center of attention, her beauty and influence unquestioned in the earlier years after her marriage to Amira's father. She had imagined that her presence alone would command the respect of the village, but Amira's natural warmth and wisdom made her own charms fade into obscurity. Every compliment directed toward Amira felt like a slight to Lasha, a reminder that no amount of effort or display could replicate the effortless light that Amira carried within her. As days turned into weeks, Lasha began plotting in quiet corners, whispering to herself as she observed Amira moving among the villagers, her laughter like sunlight piercing through the mist of early morning. She thought of ways to diminish the girl's influence, to remind the people that Amira was merely a stepchild and that her presence was owed more to circumstance than virtue. In her calculations, Lasha considered ridicule, restrictions on Amira's movements, and subtle manipulations to isolate her from the community. None of these methods felt sufficient. The girl's light was too persistent, too pure, and every attempt to dim it seemed to fail before it had even begun. Yet Amira, oblivious to the brewing storm, continued to live with an open heart. She offered guidance to those who sought it, comforted those in sorrow, and sang songs of hope in the village square. Travelers who passed through the village marveled at the warmth and harmony that seemed to follow her, remarking that the land itself responded to her presence. Streams sparkled a little brighter, and even the wind seemed to carry a melody when she walked through the fields. It was impossible, it seemed, for any malice to touch her directly, as though the world itself conspired to protect the goodness she embodied. This combination of innocence, intelligence and radiant virtue made Lasha's envy all the more dangerous. Where once she might have simply spoken ill or withheld kindness, now she began envisioning a more permanent solution, one that would ensure Amira's absence from both village life and memory. The stepmother's imagination conjured a place hidden from sun and sky, where no eye would see the girl and no voice would echo her name. In Lasha's mind, the cellar beneath their home, dark, damp and forgotten, seemed the perfect prison. It was a place where time itself might obscure Amira's influence, and where the earth above could seal her presence from the world. Though the shadow of this plan loomed, Amira remained unaware. Her days continued with the same grace and quiet joy, tending the village, helping neighbors, and sharing her gentle wisdom. She spoke with the confidence of one who trusts in justice and in the goodness of others, not knowing that her life was about to change in ways she could never foresee. And as the stepmother's envy ripened into action, the foundations of the earth itself, the very soil under the cellar, seemed to stir subtly as if sensing the injustice that would soon be attempted, and preparing to intervene in ways that no human scheme could foresee. Lasha's envy, once a dull ember simmering in the shadows, had grown into a blazing fire that consumed her thoughts day and night. She watched Amira move through the village, noting how children's laughter followed her and how even the elders sought her counsel before making decisions. Every compliment offered to the girl felt like a jab to Lasha's pride, a reminder that no title, no position, and no charm she possessed could rival the natural grace that Amira exuded. Her stepdaughter's intelligence, her kindness, her ability to ease conflicts and soothe sorrows, all of it seemed to mock Lasha silently, turning admiration into fuel for her growing resentment. In quiet moments, Lasha would pace the hallways of their home, her fingers clutching the hem of her robes as she muttered curses under her breath. She recalled how Amira had effortlessly organized the village's planting schedule last spring, ensuring that even the poorest farmers reaped good harvests. She remembered how travelers stopped to marvel at the girl's knowledge of herbs and remedies, and how mothers would entrust their sick children to her care. Each recollection stung Lasha, deepening her desire to diminish the light she could not overshadow. The envy twisted into bitterness and bitterness hardened into resolve. She would act, no matter the cost. The cellar beneath their home became the focus of her plotting. Lasha had long considered it a space of punishment, a dark, forgotten place where misbehaving servants were reprimanded. Now she envisioned it as a prison not just for containment but for erasure. If Amira could be confined there, hidden away from sunlight and human eyes, the villagers' attention would naturally shift. Praise and admiration would dry up, and Lasha would once again regain the central place in the household and community that she so desperately craved. In her mind, the plan was perfect, cruel but precise, a measure that would restore her sense of control and satisfy her growing fury. She studied the layout of the house, tracing the path to the cellar and imagining how easily she could lead Amira down the narrow staircase, past the sturdy door that locked with a heavy iron latch. The darkness would conceal the girl completely, making the world above forget her entirely. Lasha's thoughts were meticulous, detailing every step. The moment Amira would be taken unaware, the key turned in the lock, the heavy silence that would follow, and the sense of finality that would satisfy Lasha's wounded pride. She felt a perverse sense of triumph at her cunning, blind to the forces beyond human comprehension that stirred quietly in response to her malicious intent. Meanwhile, Amira continued her days in serene unawareness. She greeted villagers with her customary warmth, helped mend torn clothes, tended to the garden, and shared stories with the children. She did not notice the darkening glances of her stepmother nor the tightness in Lasha's jaw as the woman observed her from the doorway. To Amira, life flowed gently, a river of small joys and quiet satisfaction. She could not foresee the storm gathering beneath her own roof, nor the depths of the cellar that awaited her, a trap designed to suppress her light and isolate her from all she cherished. Yet even as Lasha solidified her plan, the earth beneath the cellar seemed to shift imperceptibly. Small tremors, subtle and silent, passed through the soil. Roots of ancient trees whispered in low tones, and the wind carried a faint hum of warning. The natural world sensed the injustice about to unfold and stirred in anticipation, as if preparing to guard the child of light against the cruelty of a heart consumed by envy. Lasha, consumed entirely by her hatred, did not notice these signs. She only saw the path to power and recognition, blinded to the consequences that would ripple far beyond the walls of her home. In her mind, the act was inevitable. She pictured Amira trapped, silent, and forgotten, a shadow of the girl who once moved freely and brought joy to all. The plan gave her a sense of purpose, a distorted victory that made every pang of envy fade beneath the intoxicating allure of control. The steps were set, the cellar waiting, and the world above, as Lasha believed, would be hers to command. If only she could see the girl locked away and removed from the eyes of the living. Lasha approached Amira with a false smile, carrying a small bundle of cleaning supplies and an extra lantern. "Amira, my dear," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "the cellar has gathered much dust. If you would be so kind as to tidy it for me, the house will shine once more." Amira, trusting and dutiful, nodded without hesitation. She tucked her hair behind her ears, took the lantern, and followed her stepmother down the narrow staircase that led to the cellar. The air grew cooler and damper with each step, carrying the earthy scent of soil and stone. Shadows stretched long along the walls, but Amira barely noticed, her mind focused on the task at hand, unaware of the trap being laid. Once she reached the bottom, the heavy door creaked closed behind her, and the sound of a key turning in the lock sent a sudden chill through the air. Amira's eyes widened, the dim glow of the lantern flickering as the realization struck her. The cellar was unlike any room she had ever cleaned. It was cold and unwelcoming, the walls slick with dampness, and the floor uneven with small stones and debris. The lantern cast wavering light, revealing jagged corners and the shadowed recesses where darkness seemed to linger like a living thing. Her heart began to race and she took a few cautious steps, her fingers brushing the rough stone. "Lasha?" she called softly, her voice echoing faintly off the walls. There was no reply, only the distant drip of water and the sigh of wind through small cracks above. She tried again, louder this time, but her voice felt swallowed by the room, reduced to a fragile whisper. The fear crept slowly into her chest, not in overwhelming waves, but as a persistent chill that wrapped around her heart. She set the lantern down on the floor, the small circle of light trembling against the oppressive darkness. Amira's hands ran along the stone walls, searching for a door, a window, anything that could offer escape. The walls were solid, unyielding, and the heavy air pressed against her lungs, making each breath feel laborious. She tried to remember the steps of her chores, but even the simplest tasks seemed impossible in the weight of isolation. Her knees bent and she sank to the floor, holding herself close, trying to make sense of the betrayal that had brought her here. Every sound from above, the creak of floorboards, the faint laughter of passing villagers, seemed to emphasize her solitude. Minutes stretched into hours. The lantern flickered as if the flame itself was anxious, shadows dancing wildly across the cellar walls. Amira's voice cracked when she tried to call for help again, her words lost in the emptiness. The air smelled of damp earth and mold, heavy and suffocating, pressing against her skin. Her hands trembled as she ran them over the floor, tracing patterns in dust and loose soil, desperate to anchor herself in something tangible. She whispered a prayer, not knowing whether it would reach the heavens or the hidden spirits of the earth. Though fear gnawed at her, a quiet resolve began to settle in her chest. The darkness could not diminish her spirit entirely. Her mind began tracing memories of the sun, the laughter of children, the warmth of the village hearth. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting those memories fill her heart, letting light bloom within despite the suffocating shadows. The cellar seemed endless, yet the pulse of hope, fragile but unbroken, beat steadily in her chest. Outside, Lasha leaned against the door, confident her plan was complete. The stepmother believed the girl's light extinguished, her influence erased, but she did not sense the subtle tremor of the earth beneath the cellar, the silent whisper of forces unseen, and the faint stirrings of the land that had always favored Amira. Shadows filled the room, but they were only the beginning. The true power of Amira's presence, bound to the earth itself, had already begun to awaken, quietly preparing to rise. The morning sun rose over the village of Leone, casting long golden rays across the rooftops and fields, but something felt amiss. Villagers stirred in their homes, exchanging uneasy glances as whispers spread like wildfire. "Where is Amira?" one mother asked, her voice tinged with worry as she looked around the bustling square. Children, usually giggling under Amira's gentle watch, wandered aimlessly, calling her name. Their small voices carried through the streets, but there was no answer, only the distant crowing of roosters and the rustle of leaves. Merchants at the market paused mid-sale, noticing the absence of the girl who had always greeted them with warmth and bright eyes. Amira's laughter, which usually accompanied her help in fetching water or tidying stalls, was missing. Even the elders, who spent their mornings recounting tales by the river, felt the imbalance. One of them murmured to the others, "Something is wrong. Amira does not appear as she should." Fear, mingled with confusion, began to settle over the village. Mothers called for their children, searching the fields and pathways. They checked the well, the riverbank, and the gardens where Amira often played and helped gather herbs. The closer they came to her home, the more their unease grew. Her small dwelling at the edge of the village, normally vibrant with the aroma of baking bread and the sound of sweeping, seemed silent and empty. Lasha, appearing calm and composed, greeted them with false cheer, her hands busy with chores that masked her scheming. But villagers, perceptive and familiar with the subtle ways of her stepdaughter, sensed the tension in the household. Conversation spread quickly. "Perhaps she is sick," someone offered, though their voice carried doubt. "Or taken ill by the spirits," another whispered. Yet none could explain the strange emptiness that had fallen over the home. Children huddled together, timidly calling Amira's name again, their small hands clasped in prayer. Even the village animals seemed to sense the disruption. Chickens clucked nervously, dogs whined, and the goats refused to move from their pens. As the day advanced, the village council convened. The elders, wise in the ways of Leone, gathered to consider the absence of the girl they all cherished. They debated whether something sinister had occurred, whether an accident or mischief was at play. Hushed tones carried through the hall, describing the girl's kindness, her helpfulness, her brightness, and the shadow her disappearance cast upon them all. Finally, the chief, his face creased with concern, spoke, "We must search every corner, every home, every path. The girl who lights our days must not vanish without cause." Meanwhile, unseen beneath the earth in the damp cellar, Amira strained her ears. Each creak of floorboards above and distant voice carried into her heart a mix of hope and despair. She knew the villagers would notice her absence. Her presence had always been felt like the pulse of the community, yet the darkness pressed around her, heavy and unyielding. The walls closed in, the dampness clinging to her skin, yet her spirit remained vigilant. She whispered into the shadows, her soft voice barely rising above the silence, "Please hear me." Outside, the village searchers scoured every field, forest edge and hidden pathway, calling her name with increasing urgency. Children trailed after them, hoping to glimpse the girl whose kindness and light they adored. Each corner of Leone seemed to echo with the memory of her laughter, her helpful hands and the warmth she brought. And beneath the house, in the oppressive cellar, Amira listened, the knowledge of their concern lending strength to her resolve. The villagers' awareness of her absence was the first sign that her story was not meant to end in shadows, that the earth itself would soon rise to shield her name. Days passed in Leone, yet Amira did not appear. The villagers, first content to trust the stepmother's word, soon grew uneasy. Children came to the square, looking for the girl who had been their companion, their laughter muted and their games incomplete. "Have you seen Amira today?" one would ask, only to be met with silence or distracted answers. Mothers and fathers began searching the nearby fields, the riverbank, and the outskirts of the village, calling her name with increasing concern. Elders convened at the council hall, faces lined with worry. They noted the absence of the girl who had always brought light to the village's daily life, her laughter a balm for all who heard it. "She cannot be gone without cause," one elder murmured, his voice carrying weight in the silent room. Others nodded, recalling how she helped with chores, guided the children in lessons of kindness and storytelling, and aided in the tending of crops. Her absence, they realized, was more than a missing child, it was a disruption to the rhythm of life itself. At the house, Amira's friends approached, knocking gently on the door, calling her name. Lasha greeted them with false calm, feigning concern. "She left to visit distant relatives," she explained, her tone light but her eyes calculating. "Perhaps she will return by evening." The villagers, unsure, left with lingering unease, but some could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. Whispers began to travel through the streets. "She has been gone too long," some said. The stepmother always had her own ways. Outside, the crops began to suffer. Fields that had been lush and green showed signs of wilting, and the river that nourished the village carried a strange tremor through the soil. Farmers paused in the heat of their work, sensing an unseen imbalance. Even the animals seemed disturbed. Goats huddled closer together, and birds perched silently on fence posts, watching with wary eyes. Nature itself seemed to respond to Amira's absence, as if the heartbeat of the village had been stilled. The elders, realizing that Lasha's explanation was insufficient, sent scouts to neighboring villages and the forest edges, searching for any trace of the missing girl. They asked travelers passing through to keep an eye out, describing Amira's bright smile and gentle demeanor. Each passing day without word weighed heavily on their hearts, and the unease grew. Meanwhile, beneath the earth in the dark cellar, Amira could feel the vibrations of the village above, the whispers of concern, the soft footfalls of children, and the subtle tremors that shook the house. She strained to hear, her ears pressed to the cold, damp floor. Even though she could not step into the sunlight, she could sense the ripple of worry that had begun to spread. Her resolve strengthened. She knew that her story would not end in the shadows. The village, now fully aware that something was amiss, began to speak openly of her disappearance. Conversations carried the name of Amira through every home, every field, and every pathway. "She belongs to the earth and the village," one elder said, "and neither will let her harm come to her." The tremors in the ground continued, subtle but persistent, as though the earth itself was echoing their concern, preparing to act in defense of the girl whose light had been hidden. And so, the villagers' vigilance became a shield in itself, their search and attention weaving a silent promise that Amira's presence, though unseen, would not be erased, and the forces of the earth were listening, waiting to protect the name that Lasha had tried to bury. Beneath the cold, damp floor of the cellar, Amira pressed her palms to the hard earth, feeling its silent pulse. At first, it was subtle, a vibration that traveled up her arms like a heartbeat. Then, tiny cracks began to form in the soil around her, hairline fissures that spread slowly yet deliberately. They were not destructive but alive, as if the earth itself was stirring in response to her presence, acknowledging the injustice that had imprisoned her. The roots of nearby trees, their gnarled fingers stretching beneath the ground, began to shift. They wriggled and twisted, pushing against stones and soil, creating channels that whispered with the faintest rustle. The trees above seemed to sway without wind, their branches brushing softly against one another in a hushed conversation. The air in the cellar grew heavy with a warmth that did not burn but comforted, a subtle reminder that she was not truly alone. A gentle hum rose from the ground, faint at first, like the distant sound of a river or a chorus of insects. It grew steadily, harmonizing with the rhythm of Amira's own heartbeat. The sound carried an almost musical quality, a melody that vibrated through stone and soil alike. She closed her eyes, listening, and felt the vibrations move through her chest, through her very bones, as if the land itself recognized her innocence and sought to speak on her behalf. Every crack, every movement of the roots, every pulse of the hum felt purposeful. The earth seemed to understand her story, the unfairness of her confinement, the envy of her stepmother, the stolen moments of sunlight and freedom. It was as though the ground beneath her carried memory and emotion, storing her truth and refusing to let it fade. The hum became a chorus, echoing through hidden tunnels and reaching the foundations of the house above. Above, the villagers were beginning to sense a shift. The ground trembled slightly beneath their feet, subtle enough to be dismissed as natural, yet persistent enough to stir unease. Birds perched near the forest's edge called in unusual patterns, and even the river seemed to ripple with a gentle pulse. Something unseen had awakened beneath the surface, responding to the absent light of Amira's presence. Inside the cellar, Amira's spirit lifted. She pressed her forehead to the floor and whispered her gratitude, though she did not know to whom or what she spoke. The cracks glimmered faintly, catching the dim light that filtered through tiny gaps in the cellar walls. A warmth spread across her hands, up her arms and into her heart. The earth was alive with her story, and it would not allow injustice to prevail. Time seemed suspended as the hum continued, a low and persistent song that threaded through roots, stones and soil. The cellar, once a place of darkness and confinement, became a vessel of connection, a conduit between Amira and the world outside, between the girl whose light had been hidden and the land that refused to forget her. The earth had become her ally, her shield and her voice. And so, beneath the floorboards and foundations, the land whispered its promise. Amira's name would not be buried, her spirit would not be silenced, and the very soil would rise to protect her truth. Even in darkness, she was not alone, and the earth, ancient and watchful, had begun to move. Beneath the damp cellar floor, the subtle hum of the earth grew stronger, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat that resonated with Amira's own. At first, she thought it was merely the settling of the house, the shifting of stone and soil. But as the vibrations intensified, brushing gently along her arms and legs, she realized the sensation was deliberate, aware. The earth itself was alive, not merely as ground beneath her feet, but as a conscious presence reaching out to her. A faint glow began to seep through the cracks in the floor, illuminating the shadows that clung to the cellar walls. From these fissures, a spirit of the earth emerged, ancient and formidable yet gentle, with eyes that mirrored the rich soil of the forest and hair that cascaded like flowing roots. Its voice was not spoken aloud, but carried in vibrations, resonating through Amira's bones and whispering directly into her heart. "Fear not, child of light," it hummed. "Though walls enclose you, though darkness binds you, I am here." Amira trembled as she pressed her hand to the glowing surface of the earth. The spirit communicated in waves of warmth and vibration, each pulse filled with understanding. It spoke of the cruelty that had ensnared her, the jealousy that had cast her into darkness, and the purity of her heart that had remained untainted. Every word, every quiver, conveyed that she was seen, and her virtue had not gone unnoticed. "You are more than your body, more than the ashes that bind you," the spirit hummed. "Your name, your story, your light, these cannot be erased. I shall shield them from those who seek to bury them. I shall weave your essence into the very earth, so that even the winds, the streams, and the stones will carry your truth." Amira felt tears slip down her cheeks, each drop carried into the soil by the tender hum of the earth. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The darkness of the cellar melted into a cocoon of warmth, and the weight of isolation lifted. She pressed her forehead to the floor and whispered, "But how will the world know? How will they remember me when I am hidden here?" The spirit responded with a shiver that ran through the foundations of the house, causing dust to drift gently from the ceiling. "Even hidden, your presence shapes the world. The rivers will murmur your name, the trees will bow toward you, and the winds will carry whispers of your deeds. Your virtue is a seed, it grows unseen, yet it nourishes the hearts of those who are pure." Roots beneath the cellar twisted subtly, forming intricate patterns beneath Amira's feet, and soft vibrations traced the outline of her body. Each pulse seemed to infuse her with courage, with patience, with an understanding that the present moment of confinement was only a fragment of her story. The spirit's energy intertwined with hers, blending the human and the elemental into a single resonance that could not be silenced. Night after night, the spirit maintained its vigil. While Lasha slept above, unaware and proud of her cruel triumph, Amira's essence expanded beneath the floorboards. Tiny shoots of green pushed through the cracks, creeping silently into the walls, into the courtyard, and even into the village paths. Birds that perched nearby carried seeds from these sprouts, unknowingly scattering a living memory of Amira throughout the land. Every whisper of the wind seemed to repeat her name. Through these subtle miracles, the village began to feel a shift. Farmers noticed that plants rooted near the cellar thrived despite neglect. Children who played near the house often paused mid-step, feeling a strange warmth beneath their feet. Even the livestock seemed calmer, more harmonious. Although no one understood the source, a sense of benevolence lingered, a quiet blessing from a force unseen. Amira, though still confined, felt a growing power within her. It was not the power of defiance or rage, but of patience and resilience. She understood now that she was part of something far greater than her own body and mind. She was linked to the very soul of the land. "Will my name be remembered?" she asked, her voice trembling in the darkness. The spirit pulsed in affirmation. "Not only remembered but honored. The earth itself rises to preserve it. Your light will shine in the hearts of the living long after your captor's name is forgotten. Even without sunlight, even without freedom, your truth cannot be erased." Time became fluid as the days and nights blended into a single awareness. Amira learned to listen, to feel the vibrations of life around her, and to speak with the spirit without words. Each heartbeat of the earth became a message, a reassurance, a promise. She was not alone, and no cruelty could diminish her worth. Above, the villagers remained oblivious to the depth of what transpired beneath their feet. Lasha's pride swelled, but it was empty, for the power of envy could never touch the bond between Amira and the earth. Every tremor of the soil, every soft glow from the cracks, every subtle hum was a declaration that Amira existed beyond confinement, beyond cruelty, beyond fear. The spirit's final message came as a gentle quake that lifted dust and light alike. "Your name, child of the hearth and heart, shall be carried by the land. Even when you return to the world, your legacy will be inseparable from the earth that has sheltered you. Trust in patience, trust in truth, and know that even unseen, you are cherished." Amira lay in the cellar, feeling the pulse of life around her, her spirit intertwined with the ancient, protective presence. The darkness was no longer a prison, but a sanctuary. The earth had risen to shield her name, to safeguard her story, and to ensure that the cruelty of one would never erase the virtue of another. In the quiet, beneath the stone and soil, Amira felt a profound peace, a certainty that the world would one day know her light. Beneath the cellar floor, the earth trembled with a life of its own. At first, it was a gentle vibration that tickled Amira's senses, a pulse she felt through her fingertips pressed against the cold stone. But soon the tremors grew stronger, deliberate and rhythmic, as if the soil itself was working to undo the chains of her confinement. Tiny cracks spider-webbed across the cellar floor, widening gradually as roots shifted and vines twisted, stretching with a quiet persistence that defied the darkness above. Amira's heart raced, a mixture of fear and wonder. The air seemed to hum with anticipation as she pressed her palm to the growing fissures, feeling warmth and reassurance radiating from below. Each pulse of the earth communicated a single message: it was time. Time to rise, time to be seen, time to reclaim what had been taken. Slowly stones began to shift. The cellar walls, damp and oppressive, creaked as though acknowledging their own undoing. Dust floated in the air, sparkling faintly in the dim light that filtered through the widening cracks. Amira watched in awe as the soil molded itself into shapes that resembled steps, roots intertwining with vines to form a natural staircase. It was as though the land itself were reaching out to lift her from captivity, guiding her gently yet firmly toward freedom. With trembling hands she grasped the first of the earthy steps, feeling the solid pulse beneath her fingers. Each movement was met with resistance, yet also support, as if the ground were encouraging her, whispering that courage and patience were her companions. She stepped carefully, rising from the darkness that had confined her for so long. Her breath caught in her throat as the faint glow from the soil illuminated her path, revealing intricate patterns etched into the earth, a tapestry of light and roots that had grown from her own virtue. Above, the villagers began to sense the shifting ground. A low murmur of surprise and apprehension spread through the streets. Farmers felt the vibrations beneath their feet, children paused mid-step in curiosity, and the elders gathered, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. The earth, persistent and patient, did not allow doubt to prevail. It continued to heave and shape itself, guiding Amira toward the surface, toward the eyes of those who had begun to worry for her safety. Finally, the natural staircase reached the top, pushing aside the heavy cellar door that had once imprisoned her. Stones tumbled and roots shifted, creating a gap wide enough for Amira to emerge. She took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh air, sunlight spilling onto her face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The warmth of the sun kissed her skin, and the hum of the earth beneath her feet vibrated in harmony with her heartbeat. The villagers, drawn by the trembling and the soft hum of the earth, hurried to the cellar. Their eyes widened in astonishment as they saw Amira ascending, lifted and guided by the roots and soil itself. Murmurs spread through the crowd, whispers of amazement, awe, and reverence. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sight of a girl made luminous by the magic of the earth, a living testament to resilience and virtue. As Amira reached the topmost step, she looked down at the villagers, her eyes reflecting gratitude, courage, and the quiet strength that had carried her through darkness. The earth beneath her settled, roots retracting gently, leaving the staircase as a natural monument to her perseverance. The hidden entrance was now open, a symbol of justice, patience, and the bond between human heart and the land. Even Lasha, her stepmother, stood frozen, unable to comprehend the spectacle before her. The earth had not only freed Amira but revealed her resilience to all. The village had witnessed a miracle, one in which the land itself rose to honor truth and virtue. Amira descended fully into the village square, her feet touching familiar soil, her heart lifted higher than any staircase could reach. And in that moment, every whisper, every tremor, every rooted thread of the earth proclaimed that the girl of hidden light had emerged victorious, her name shielded and now celebrated by all. You said. The moment Amira's feet touched the sunlit ground, the earth responded with a final, resolute gesture. Beneath Lasha's frantic steps, roots burst forth from the trembling soil, coiling around her ankles and wrists like living chains. She tried to pull free, clawing at the dirt and the twisting roots, but the land, guided by a sense of justice older than memory, held her fast. Panic flared in her eyes, and the villagers, witnessing the scene, began to gather around, murmurs swelling into a chorus of astonishment. Lasha's face twisted with fear and disbelief as the roots tightened, pulling her down toward the very soil she had sought to dominate. Her own schemes, whispered lies, and cruel manipulations seemed to weigh upon her like invisible stones. The earth revealed her misdeeds as clearly as it bound her. The villagers saw traces of Amira's confinement, the marks of toil in the cellar, and the sorrow that had been forced into the girl's heart. Every deceitful word, every act of malice became visible to those who had long been too trusting. Amira, standing tall and radiant, felt neither vengeance nor anger toward Lasha. Instead, she exuded a quiet, steady warmth, a presence that seemed to illuminate the gathered crowd. The villagers' eyes shifted between the earthbound stepmother and the luminous girl before them, and the truth settled into their hearts with undeniable clarity. Lasha's lies had no place against the purity and courage that Amira carried. They could not withstand the light that rose from both her spirit and the land that protected her. The roots, still firm around Lasha, shifted gently to lift her face toward the villagers. Her vanity, her deceit, and her envy were plain for all to see. She gasped, trembling, unable to deny the truth that the earth now exposed. The girl she had tried to suppress was innocent, virtuous, and destined to shine, while her own heart had been consumed by darkness. Whispers of shame spread like wildfire through the crowd, and the elders who had once doubted Amira now bowed their heads in acknowledgement of her courage and the land's wisdom. Lasha's attempts to speak were swallowed by the rustling of leaves and the murmurs of astonished villagers. Every word she had used to manipulate, every excuse, fell flat against the undeniable evidence laid bare by the earth's intervention. Children who had once cowered at her harsh words now looked on with curiosity and awe, sensing the shift in power and the triumph of justice. Even the animals who had paused during Amira's entrapment, now observed in respectful silence, witnesses to the revelation. Amira stepped forward, her gaze steady yet gentle. She placed a hand over her heart and spoke softly, not to punish but to declare truth, that kindness, perseverance, and courage are never hidden, and that deceit cannot endure against them. The crowd, moved by both the spectacle and her words, felt a collective shift, a recognition that justice had come not through anger but through the earth's own wisdom and the resilience of a righteous heart. Finally, the roots released Lasha, leaving her trembling and humbled before the villagers. She had been unmasked, her cruelty laid bare, her schemes foiled by the very land she had tried to disregard. Humiliation painted her features as she was forced to confront the reality of her actions. In contrast, Amira's presence radiated warmth, light, and forgiveness. She had not only been freed from the cellar but elevated in the eyes of the village, her innocence and courage shining brighter than ever. The villagers gathered around her, offering hands, smiles, and tears of relief. The earth beneath their feet seemed to hum with quiet satisfaction, a soft vibration acknowledging that justice had been served. Amira, the girl of hidden light, had been vindicated, and Lasha's downfall was complete, a lesson written into the soil and remembered in every heart, that truth, courage, and virtue will always rise, no matter the darkness that seeks to suppress them. Amira's return to the village was met with a mixture of awe and relief. Word of the earth's intervention had spread swiftly, and every villager, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, gathered to witness the girl who had been hidden and yet had risen with the strength of the land itself. The once dreaded cellar now stood as a solemn reminder, its shadows replaced by sunlight streaming through the cracks, and Amira, stepping into the open air, seemed to carry the light of the earth within her. As she walked through the village, the soil beneath her feet seemed to respond to her presence. Where she stepped, the ground softened and thrived. Seeds sprouted overnight into tender shoots, and flowers unfurled their petals as if bowing in recognition of her courage. Streams sparkled more vividly, carrying clear water that seemed to hum a gentle song of welcome. The villagers began to notice the subtle miracles. Crops grew taller and healthier in her garden, trees bent slightly toward her as she passed, and even the wind appeared to whisper her name in soft rustles through the branches. Every natural sign was a testament to the bond she shared with the earth, a bond forged through endurance, integrity, and the undeniable purity of her heart. The elders, who had once doubted and questioned her, now looked upon Amira with reverence. They spoke of her not only as a girl of remarkable kindness but as a living embodiment of the land's own protective spirit. They convened a council in her honor, declaring that the relationship between the village and the earth had been reaffirmed through her trials. Ceremonies were established to mark her bravery and the justice wrought by the land itself. Villagers were taught to respect the soil, the rivers, and the trees, acknowledging that these forces could shield the innocent and ensure that virtue would never be erased. Children ran to greet her, their small hands reaching for hers as they laughed and shared stories of the days when they had whispered her name, unsure of what magic had protected her. They spoke of strange hums beneath the ground, of tremors that had guided the villagers to her hidden place, and of the gentle pulses that had seemed to communicate directly with her spirit. These tales became a part of the village's oral history, carried forward with wonder and awe. Every child learned that courage and goodness were not abstract ideals but living forces, capable of shaping the land and protecting those who honored them. Amira herself carried no pride in her heart, only gratitude for the earth that had safeguarded her. She tended to the fields with humility, her hands brushing against the soil with respect, her voice speaking softly to the trees and streams. The earth responded in kind, yielding bountiful harvests and soothing breezes. Even the animals seemed to sense her harmony with the land, approaching without fear, nuzzling against her legs, and following her footsteps with quiet devotion. Every gesture, every act of kindness, seemed to strengthen the invisible threads that connected her to the natural world, weaving a tapestry of protection, growth, and renewal. Lasha, her stepmother, had vanished into obscurity, carrying with her the weight of shame and the memory of the earth's judgment. She was neither punished by hand nor by sword. The land itself had revealed her deceit, and that revelation had been sufficient. The villagers understood that the earth's justice was both fair and inevitable, a silent force that respected innocence and truth above all else. Lasha's absence allowed the village to heal fully, removing the shadow that had once hung over their lives. As seasons passed, Amira's influence continued to grow, not through fear or dominance but through example. Festivals were held to honor the bond between humans and the land, during which children would plant seeds in her name, elders would tell her story by firelight, and travelers would learn of the girl whose spirit had merged with the soil, teaching lessons of resilience, courage, and virtue. Her story inspired art, song, and dance, all celebrating the harmony between the people and the earth that protected them. Even beyond the village, the story of Amira spread. Neighboring communities marveled at the prosperity that followed her presence and at the tale of the girl who had been buried and yet had emerged through the strength of the land itself. Travelers carried seeds from her fields, soil from her garden, and stories of the earth's whispers, spreading a culture of respect for the natural world and the principles it upheld. Amira became a symbol, a living testament to the idea that virtue, when aligned with the forces of nature, could not be extinguished by cruelty or envy. Years later, when Amira walked through the village, she could see the lasting imprint of her journey. Trees planted in her honor had grown into towering sentinels, streams diverted slightly to nourish the garden she had cultivated, and children, now grown, spoke her name with affection and reverence, telling their own young ones of the girl of hidden light who had been shielded by the earth. The village thrived, its people learning that justice, kindness, and truth were not merely human ideals but forces recognized and supported by the land itself. Amira's legacy endured not only in memory but in every living aspect of the village: the fertile soil, the singing rivers, the bending trees, and the laughter of children. She had become a bridge between the people and the earth, a reminder that those who act with courage and kindness are never truly alone, and that even when hidden or suppressed, the virtuous are always seen, always protected. The story of Amira, the girl whose stepmother sought to silence her but whose spirit was shielded by the earth, became a foundational lesson, carried forward through generations, that truth and virtue are eternal, and the earth itself rises to honor and protect them. Generations had passed since Amira, the girl of hidden light, had been freed from the cellar by the rising earth, yet her story continued to echo through the village of Leone with undiminished power. Mothers and fathers would gather their children at twilight, when the sky was painted with streaks of amber and rose, and tell them the tale of the girl whose courage and kindness had summoned the land itself to her aid. They spoke of the cellar, dark and suffocating, where she had been trapped unjustly, and of the stepmother, Lasha, whose envy had driven her to cruelty. But most of all, they told of the earth's unwavering protection and of how it had ensured that Amira's name would never be forgotten. The children listened wide-eyed, imagining the trembling ground, the roots twisting and rising to form a stairway from the depths of darkness, and the soil gently lifting Amira toward the sunlight. They saw her in their mind's eyes, small yet luminous, carrying an inner light that neither shadow nor confinement could extinguish. They whispered her name softly in the quiet moments before sleep, in their games and in the songs they sang to the wind, feeling a subtle warmth as if the earth itself responded to their voices. It was as though by speaking her name, they were honoring a pact between humanity and the land, a promise that virtue and courage would always be remembered and protected. Over time, the story of Amira became more than a tale, it became a guide for living. Parents reminded their children that the earth watches, listens, and holds those who act with integrity. When a child faltered in kindness, elders would gently say, "Amira's eyes are upon you and the earth remembers." When disputes arose, the villagers spoke of how even the roots beneath their feet would shift in favor of truth. Every planting season, farmers would pause at the edge of their fields, placing their hands upon the soil in silent homage to the girl whose spirit had intertwined with the land, trusting that the earth would bless their labor as it had blessed hers. The village itself transformed in response to her legacy. Where Amira had walked, the soil grew richer and more fertile. Wildflowers sprang up along pathways she had once taken. Streams adjusted their courses subtly, flowing with a kind of grace that seemed aware of her presence. The villagers began rituals to honor the bond between humans and the land, celebrating both harvest and virtue, for they had learned that prosperity and harmony stem not only from toil but from the alignment of human hearts with the spirit of the earth. Even the natural world seemed to acknowledge her memory. Birds would call her name in gentle trills at dawn, the wind would carry a soft whisper of Amira through the trees, and rivers would glint as though holding her reflection within their currents. It was said that anyone who paused to listen carefully could hear the faint pulse of her courage in the rustle of leaves or the shift of the soil. Farmers, hunters, and children alike came to understand that Amira's influence was a living, breathing force, one that shaped the world with quiet, persistent care. The elders made it a custom to teach not just the story, but the lesson woven within it. They instructed that bravery is not the absence of fear, and that kindness is not a weakness. They told the villagers that even when evil seemed to triumph, truth and virtue would find their way through the cracks, guided by the enduring power of the earth itself. Each generation was encouraged to act with integrity, to speak honestly, and to honor the land, so that the cycle of protection and remembrance established by Amira's ordeal would continue. Travelers who passed through Leone carried her story to distant lands. They spoke of the cellar, of the rising roots, and of the girl whose courage had moved the very ground beneath her. In villages far and wide, parents began telling their children of the girl who could not be buried, whose name was etched into the memory of the earth itself. Seeds were planted in her honor, ceremonies were held to mark the cycle of growth and renewal, and songs were composed to celebrate her enduring spirit. Even centuries later, it was believed that if one visited the hill where the cellar had once stood, the ground would feel subtly warmer, as though recognizing the presence of a heart aligned with truth. At dawn, when the first light touched the earth, children were told to whisper their intentions to the soil, trusting that the same protective spirit that had raised Amira would hear them. Farmers continued to seek guidance from the land, elders interpreted the signs of growth and decay, and the entire village existed in a state of attentive reverence toward the natural world that had once delivered justice on behalf of a single, virtuous girl. Amira's story, passed down through countless retellings, became more than legend. It became a living proverb, shaping the moral fabric of the community and the way the people treated each other and the earth around them. Every time a villager acted with courage, compassion, or integrity, it was said that Amira's spirit smiled upon them, and the soil beneath their feet hummed with quiet approval. Even in the smallest acts, lifting a fallen branch, helping a neighbor, tending to crops with care, the village remembered the enduring power of a life lived in truth and virtue. The tale reminded all who heard it that darkness cannot truly obscure the light of a pure heart, that cruelty cannot erase innocence, and that the earth itself will intervene to preserve goodness. The story of Amira inspired generations to live in harmony, to act with courage, and to honor the land that watches and listens. And so, her name remained eternal, whispered in homes, carried by the wind, echoed in rivers, and remembered in the beating hearts of every child who learned of the girl who had been hidden yet never forgotten. In time, the proverb became a part of everyday speech. The earth holds those who are true, and no darkness can bury their name. It served as both a warning and a comfort, a reminder that virtue is never invisible, that innocence will always be recognized, and that those who live with courage and kindness are eternally cradled by the land itself. Children grew up repeating her name, feeling the pulse of her spirit in every stone, tree and stream, and knowing that even when they themselves faced hardship or injustice, the earth would stand as a steadfast witness to their hearts. Thus, the story of Amira, the girl who had been locked away yet shielded by the earth, endured beyond the memory of those who had witnessed it firsthand. It became a foundation of the village's culture, a timeless lesson carried forward to every new generation. Through every whispered word, every song sung at dusk and every seed planted in reverent homage, Amira's legacy persisted, a testament to the enduring truth that goodness, courage, and virtue can never be hidden, and that the earth itself will always remember and protect the names of the righteous.